developed a model where we have supply, demand, and equilibrium. And we've described comparative statics and elasticity. And now let's use these tools that we've developed to analyze the effect of a sales tax. So there's two types of taxes you could impose. One's called an ad valorem tax, which is typically the types of taxes that you see. So this is going to be a percentage of the sales price. So if the price of an apple is, say, P, you would pay 1 plus alpha times P, where alpha is a tax rate. This is typically, for example, the GST or an HST that you see is going to be this type of a tax rate. A simpler type of tax rate is a unit or a specific tax. So this tax doesn't depend on the actual price, it just depends on the number of units that are sold. So if the price of an apple is P, then you pay P plus tau. So this is the Greek letter tau. So you pay P plus tau, where tau is the tax rate. So in the US, the federal tax on gasoline is a specific tax. Now, the specific tax is just a little bit easier for us to analyze. So we'll start with that, and we'll see how you could do the same things with the ad valorem tax that you can do with the specific tax. Okay, so we'll start with the specific tax of tau dollars. So if the consumer pays a price of P, out of that price P, tau dollars go to the government, and the rest goes to the supplier. So the government takes its cut of tau dollars, and the remaining P minus tau goes to the person selling it to the consumer. Now, the supplier, or the person selling it to the consumer, only gets P minus tau when the consumer is actually paying P. So it's as if the price were P minus tau. So this is going to cause the supply curve to shift to the left. So at the price P, the supplier is going to supply the quantity that they would have supplied at the price P minus tau. So let's go back to our workhorse example that we've looked at repeatedly in this chapter, which is the Canadian market for pork. So let's suppose there's a specific tax of $1.05 per kilogram. Without the tax, let's say the price is $2.95, then the supply of pork would be 206 million kilograms. This is just according to the supply function that we've seen earlier. After the tax, the suppliers are only going to get $1.90. Right? So the consumers pay $2.95, but out of that, the government takes $1.05. So what's left over for the suppliers is $1.90. So the supply is obviously going to be less than the 206 million that they would be supplying at the price of $2.95 if they got the whole $2.95. So at what price is the firm actually going to supply 206? Well, the price needs to be higher, right? They need to actually receive the $2.95. So the price would actually have to be, that the consumers pay would actually have to be $2.95 plus the tax. So when the government takes its cut, the firms still receive $2.95. In other words, the price paid by the consumer would have to be $4. So what this is going to do is cause the supply curve to shift upwards by tau dollars. Now this is going to cause the equilibrium price to go up and the equilibrium quantity to go down. And by how much is that going to happen is going to depend on the elasticity. So this is why we need to know the elasticities of demand and supply so we can estimate these types of effects. So let's look at a picture so we can better understand these effects. So like I said, at the price of $4, the government takes $1.05. So it's as if the firm receives $2.95. So if this was the original supply curve, then the firm would be producing 206 million kilos at the price $2.95. So now, after there's a tax, when the price is $4, the firm behaves as if the price were $2.95 and they produce 206. So this is the sense in which the supply curve shifts upwards. So now we have this new supply curve, S2. So what's the tax revenue going to be? Well, we look for the equilibrium. The equilibrium is, the demand curve didn't change. So this is the demand curve. So we look at the new supply curve, the new demand curve, or the unchanged demand curve, I should say. And we look at where they meet to find the market equilibrium after the tax has been imposed. And that's going to be right here. So the price, the equilibrium price with the tax is going to be $4 from the consumer's perspective, and the quantity is going to be 206 million. Now, what is the government's revenue going to be? Well, remember, out of the $4, the government collects $1.05. So for every unit that's sold, the government collects $1.05, and there's 206 million units sold. So the total amount that the government collects is $1.05 times 206 million. So that's going to be $216.3 million. So this shaded area, so the area of this rectangle is going to be the government revenue. The height of this rectangle is the tax rate. The width of this rectangle is the quantity. So the area of the rectangle is just height times width, and so that's the revenue. Now the way we framed this was that the suppliers are the ones paying the tax, right? The consumers just pay a price, and then out of the price that the consumers pay, the suppliers have to pay a cut to the government. But who's actually paying the tax? Is it the consumers? Is it the producers? Or are they splitting the burden of the tax? That's something important to understand. So what we see here is that the effective price changed from, remember, the equilibrium before there was a tax was $3.30. The equilibrium after the tax was introduced was $4. So the price went up by 70 cents. But the tax was actually $1.05. So the price increase doesn't fully account for the tax. So some part of the tax is being borne by the consumers, and some part of the tax is being borne by the producers. And so one of the things you'd want to know if you're a government trying to decide what the effects of a tax are going to be, you'll want to understand how the different parties, the consumers and the producers, are affected by increases or decreases to the tax. What we really want to know is this: the derivative of price with respect to the tax. So how much does the price that the consumers pay go up if we increase the tax a little bit? Remember, this is the equilibrium condition. Right? Remember, we've phrased it so that the suppliers don't receive the entire amount P that the consumers pay. Consumers pay P, but the producers only receive P minus tau and have to pay the government tau per unit. So in equilibrium, the price has to be such that the quantity that the consumers demand at the price P is equal to the quantity supplied by the suppliers when the price were P minus tau. So the equilibrium price is going to depend on the tax. So if there's no tax, for example, if tau is 0, then the equilibrium price is $3.30. If the tax is $1.05, then the equilibrium price is $4, and so forth. So for every possible tau, for every possible tax, we can calculate a different equilibrium price. And we'll represent that equilibrium price as a function of the tax by P of tau. So the equilibrium condition becomes, for every tau, the quantity demanded by the consumers at the price P of tau has to equal the quantity supplied by the suppliers at the price P of tau minus tau. What we're going to do is take the derivative of this with respect to tau on both sides. So let me write down that original equation up here. D of P of tau equals S of P of tau minus tau. Okay, so taking the derivative of the left side is pretty straightforward. It's just application of the chain rule. It's a derivative of demand with respect to P times derivative of P with respect to tau. Again, we're going to see the chain rule for the right-hand side. So it's derivative of supply with respect to price times the derivative of what's inside with respect to tau. So the derivative of this with respect to tau is just the derivative of P with respect to tau minus 1. Derivative of tau with respect to tau. We can rearrange this a little bit. So we're going to solve for dp d tau, because that's what we're interested in. So solving this equation, so the derivative of d with respect to p times dp d tau equals ds dp times dp d tau minus 1. We rearrange that equation solving for dp d tau, and we find that dp d tau equals the derivative of supply with respect to price divided by the difference of the derivatives of supply and demand with respect to price. Now, what do we know? What do we know about these things? We know that this has a negative sign. We typically know that this and this have positive signs. So, if this and this have positive signs, and this has a negative sign, then the denominator has a positive sign, because we have negative, negative, and the numerator has a positive sign. Therefore, the sign of this entire expression is positive. So dp d tau is a positive number. So price has to be increasing in the tax, which is intuitive. But what's the exact rate? Right? Because that's pretty obvious, right? If we introduce a tax, then of course the consumer is going to have to pay more. That seems pretty straightforward. But what we really want to know is how much more is the consumer going to pay? What we're going to do is multiply and divide this expression by P over Q. So we multiply the numerator by P over Q and the denominator by P over Q. Well, this expression here, this ds dp times P over Q, well, that's just eta, our supply elasticity. Same thing with this term. And this latter term, which is the derivative of demand with respect to P times P over Q, that's nothing but demand elasticity. So we've got an expression for the derivative of price with respect to the tax is the ratio of supply elasticity to the difference of supply elasticity and demand elasticity. So now we can really answer this question of who's paying the tax. The proportion of the tax being borne by the consumers is dp d tau. So if we start increasing the tax a little bit, the part of the tax that the consumers pay is dp d tau. The rest is borne by the producers. Now, what if we had made the consumers pay the tax instead? So instead of the producers, we had the consumers actually explicitly pay for the tax. So, like before, the specific tax is tau. Now the consumers, instead of paying a price P, they pay P plus tau. Tau goes to the government, P goes to the suppliers. Well then, when the consumers pay P plus tau, the suppliers get P. This is going to cause the demand curve to shift downwards. Why? Because at the price P, the consumers have to pay P plus tau. So the equilibrium condition is going to be, this should be a tau. What is the price at which the consumers demand when the price is P plus tau is exactly equal to the producer's supply when the price is P. Now, if we go back to our pork example, we'll find that this is going to be, when tau equals $1.05, we'll find that this is just going to be P equals $2.95. So nothing changed. The consumer's still going to pay the same $4. So the picture is now that this demand curve shifts downwards. We were originally at this demand curve, and then we shift down to this new demand curve. This is the demand curve with the specific tax. Now, even if the price were $2.95, the effective price is $4. So it doesn't make a difference whether you cause the consumers to pay the tax or the producers to pay the tax. In the end, the incidence of the tax is going to be split according to the elasticities, and it's not going to really matter who actually pays the tax. Physically, who you collect the tax from doesn't matter. The equilibrium price is going to adjust so that the elasticities determine who the burden of the tax falls upon. Now, what if we had done an ad valorem tax instead? Notice that the tax rate, effectively, per unit, the amount of tax that they're paying is 26.25%. They're paying $1.05. The effective price is $4, so it's as if they're paying 26.25%. So if we replace the specific tax tau with the ad valorem tax alpha, which is 26.25%, what that would do would be to cause the demand curve to rotate. And the gap between the original demand curve and the demand curve with the tax would be alpha times the price. So I can show you a picture of that. This demand curve would rotate over to this demand curve. However, it would cross the supply curve exactly at the point where the demand curve with the specific tax had crossed it. So the government is going to raise exactly the same revenue, the area of this rectangle. So you can do exactly what you would do with a unit tax using an ad valorem tax. So all the analysis we did would be exactly the same, it would just be a little trickier. And the unit tax is just simpler for us to analyze.